My name is Odd Gurbin from Norwegian Cognitive Center, who helps SMB market starting to use AI in their digital improvements. Today's topic is use of business automation within media. And today we won't introduce each speaker. We're just gonna have them up. And first, we will start with Jenny Vik from the University of Gothenburg, who has interviewed a lot of media leaders in use of AI within the media industry. We will then go over to meet Tom Solbakken from Upfeed, where they help journalists improve viewing time and scroll depth based on AI. And the last presentation will be Miguel Silva from Visualist, who use AI to streamline and automate compliance. We have a hard stop at 9:30, and then we're gonna have a Q&A, and then also a discussion, a roundtable discussion using how to use AI or cognitive technologies within the media industry. So welcome, Jenny. Thank you for coming to us.
Thank you. Oops. Good morning. Yes, so I'm a journalism studies researcher from Gothenburg, and I'm currently running a research project on the automation of journalism. And last summer, I sent out a survey to 128 media managers, innovators, and strategists in Nordic media houses to explore their views and experiences of implementing and developing AI for journalism. So the project as a whole includes survey, interviews, and observations of meetings. And I've visited several media houses in Sweden, but also interviewed people in the north. And just to give you a context for the survey, my aim of the project is to find out how can we use automation to strengthen journalism based on the democratic values that we work for. How can these be shaped and enacted through automation? This is not to say that it doesn't have to do with the commercial side of the business, because I find them intertwined. But I then look at the network of actors involved in the development of AI, because it's not only tech people or journalists, it's both. I also want to find out the importance of how you apply different methods for collaboration and cooperation. And also look a lot at the organizational factors for innovation. How can we create an innovative climate? How do we best organize innovation for journalism in media houses? So looking at the survey then, it was a survey of media managers, but also other people in charge of developing AI, because it differs very much where you look, who is in charge. It's 128 respondents and 51 replied, so it's a response rate of 40%. And the responses were concentrated to Sweden. That is because it was also the selection is based on our network, so it's a bit concentrated to Sweden, but as you can see, other Nordic countries are also represented. And the respondents are mostly editor-in-chief or publishers or strategy managers of some kind. And I wanted to see the reasons for implementing AI in the first place. And these are the responses. The absolutely most important reason for automation is to automate routine tasks, boring everyday tasks that doesn't have to be fulfilled by people, to free journalists for more qualitative tasks, but also to increase the production of news in terms of auto-generated news items in data-driven areas. And that is very common when it comes to weather, sports, economy, real estate, affairs, and so on. Most media houses have these kind of robots now. But of course, also the distribution of news, how to reach and personalize news to the user is also a very big area. On a question, almost 87% of the respondents found that they thought that media business is lagging behind other businesses when it comes to developing AI. And that feeling is not correct when you look at the statistics. Media business is not behind, really. But I think it's interesting, the sense of being too late and being behind. I think it has something to do with the different obstacles people meet when trying to develop this new technology. What are the main obstacles when it comes to actually moving forward in this area? Well, not surprisingly, it's a lack of right skills. And this is a new technology, so not many people have the skills, and also the skills that are needed are very attractive in society as a whole. So media business has to compete with other sectors for these competencies. But it's also about lack of familiarity of AI in the newsroom. So there's not a cultural understanding or any expectations of what AI should be wider in the organization. So it doesn't generate any ideas, and maybe there could be some kind of resistance in actually changing routines into more automated models. 34% also says that the management is an issue because management is not educated or driven enough when it comes to AI. Insufficient strategies is an interesting obstacle as well, because strategies are not really formulated when it comes to AI specifically. About 40% says they don't have any strategy for AI development at all. 50% says that they have some kind of thought around AI, but it's included in the overall strategies. But clearly here's some kind of, there's a need for more developed thought and discussion around what AI can be used for on a wider front in the organizations. When it comes to ethical standards and editorial responsibility, that is not a problem at all, according to the respondents, which is interesting as well because this has been raised as an issue sometimes in the debate. To actually success in the development of AI, there needs to be a joint venture in the organization. Many times, according to my interviews, AI development is set into some central innovation hub in organization, maybe under the head of IT. But clearly, the most successful projects has been where people come together from different sectors, departments of the organization. So there's a need to collaborate on these matters. But when it comes to how that goes, there could be problems. So 60% says that it's kind of difficult to get journalists and tech people to collaborate and speak the same language, and that they need to learn methods for collaboration. And the collaboration is not new in media, but it's perhaps behind other sectors like healthcare or IT, where collaborative work has been common for a longer time. I was also interested in, oh, sorry, there's been a wrong headline here. It should say who is responsible for AI development in your organization. Mostly, it is some kind of strategy or innovation manager, or product manager. A product manager is a growing role in media business that didn't really exist 10 or 15 years ago. But now it's increasingly common with product managers, product owners. And I think it's really interesting because these people, they can come from anywhere. Many of the product owners doesn't have a background in journalism or tech. They are from economics or marketing or something like that. So this new influence and the new role, I think, deserves some attention and discussion. Also, they are not even managers per se in the organization. They don't have that authority. But they are many times in charge of the AI development. Looking at the chief editor or publisher, only 26% say that they are in charge. And I also think this is an important number, and that is also evident in my interviews, that the editorial management is not always or rarely engaged in the technical solutions of the newsroom. And although this may have to do with that the AI has been more common when it comes to the commercial side of the business, it merges increasingly. So I see a need for publishing management also to be engaged and actively influencing these processes more than has been up to date. And the head of IT is also many times in charge. And that is also something that maybe needs reconsideration because the IT management doesn't have the overall view of editorial needs. To conclude, I would like to point at some main takeaways. This has been a very rich material, and when I entered the project, my thought was, my aim was to look into editorial and publishing values and how they were enacted. But through my survey and my interviews, I discovered that there's been a clear merging, that everything is overlapping in the media organizations nowadays. So the commercial development is so entwined with the editorial development, which is why editorial leaders need to engage much more than they are. However, when it comes to news media, AI is still in a very initial phase. So we are not lagging behind other sectors, but everybody is in an initial phase. So it's natural to not have the knowledge, not have familiarity, to not know what this should be used for. Everybody is collaborating with this. However, in that quest for finding use for AI, it's important to not hand it over to IT departments or single individual product owners. But it's important to see this as one very important tool to be implemented throughout the organization, both when it comes to distribution, publishing, but also to strengthen journalistic methods, which is actually a very interesting area of use, but that is perhaps lagging behind other ways of application. So collaboration is needed, and that is both a cultural way of seeing this, an organizational mindset that maybe needs to be developed. Because it's also clear in my interviews that many of very successful ideas when it comes to AI, new technological solutions, doesn't even come from the in-house staff, maybe from external consultants or hired developers or suppliers that come into the organization for a while, and they can see that, hey, maybe you can do this. So it's very important to acknowledge that organizations change. It's not only the in-house traditional way of thinking. You need to be very inclusive and sort of look at the opportunities that these new networks offer. But then there's also a matter of method when it comes to collaboration. So how should we do that? How do we collaborate between different departments and different interests? How do we negotiate commercial, technological, and editorial needs in the same project? So that also needs new thinking and new trials, and that is definitely going on. So knowledge sharing and looking into other what other organizations are doing is crucial, I think. Also to look at other sectors that has been doing this for a while. I think it's a good recipe. And finally, I would like to emphasize again that one of my main conclusions of the project is that leadership is so important, and not only the IT leadership or the commercial leadership, but the editorial leadership needs to be much more engaged and progressive. And the organizations where editorial leaders actually sit down with other managers in those projects and actually, because they are on top of the resources, right? So it's not only about developing good technical solutions, because we can have these solutions. It's up to the management to make use of the solutions. So that is why I think leadership needs to be educated when it comes to the possibilities and sort of activated more than it has been up until this point. And that is also visible that I think there is a raised interest in this area in all parts of the organization. But that is perhaps something that we could discuss. How do we reach the top-level management with these questions? Because it definitely concerns them. And how do we do that? It's very busy people, and they have a tradition of delegating these questions to others. But also, what are the main needs of the media organizations then? How do we set up a discussion that actually have themes moving the organizations forward? So what are the main needs that needs to be solved by technology? Because technology is in itself not a goal. It should definitely serve the organizational goals in the end. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Tom Skålbecken. I'm from Upfeed, and I was expecting to find a slide that was... okay. There we go. Yes, I'm going to talk about how to improve the journalist workflow in Workday by using AI. I held this presentation last week at the World Association of Newspapers Digital Europe conference in Oslo, together with Schibsted, because we're doing a pilot project with them. And this is Christian Schibsted, who founded Schibsted back in 1839. And it's kind of interesting to see what the progress have been going on since then. So this is the slides that the Schibsted project manager was presenting. So what they do is when Schibsted are making their own in-house content management solution called Create, and they add different tools into that solution to help the journalists perform better and be more efficient. So they have different, they use AI and all kinds of different things into this. And of course, the other thing that they have is that they have about 50, 60 brands that are using the same solution, which means they all have their own identity. And of course, when it comes to brand, it's like when you're buying a packet of crisps, then you kind of expect, if you have barbecue flavor on the package, you expect it to taste like barbecue. And of course, it's kind of the same thing in newspapers. If you open Aftonbladet in the Swedish tabloid, you expect a sports article in Aftonbladet to be giving an experience in one way. Whereas if you read about sports in Aftenposten, in the Norwegian newspaper, you expect that one as well to be a different experience because they all have their own flavors and own brands. And that's also a very important aspect for Schibsted. So, and that's kind of, he pulled out a screenshot from our system when he wanted to explain this, and that's the fact that we can use, one of the reasons I want to use Upfit for as well is, besides improving the efficiency, is also to make sure that people are more in line with the flavor of the day for that particular product or part of the product. So back to the Upfeed part of the presentation. I want to sort of take you 8 years back in time, 9 years back in time. This is the founder, Joachim. He's serial founder of various IT companies back in the .com days. And then he went back to finish a double master's in technical finance. And then after that, he decided to set up an investment fund with some friends. Now his task as part of the fund was to use AI, so he built bespoke AI elements to do a sentiment analysis of all the positions of the various companies in the fund, in order to try to detect if there was flush signals, a signal in the news about the different share companies that caused you to sort of really get rid of all the shares of that particular company. The thing is, the data was too noisy, and also during the process he said that he got a bit of a dislike to the industry, so he figured out he could take that AI that's been used to analyze news and use it to help freelancers in the work of selling the content to media companies. So he set up a marketplace for this AI, and also then to grade. So he used the AI, so the journalists would upload the content to this marketplace. It will do an evaluation and give them a sort of a general readability score. And then I was pulled in when he was trying to raise some funds as what you call it, the media knowledge expert, because I was been working. I was one of the founders of Isinic, which some of you might have heard of. It's the CMS system that's been used by, when I left the company in 2010, was 600 media companies. So we had most of the big newspapers in Northern Europe, the Times, Telegraph, Die Telegraaf in Holland, Aftonbladet, Die Welt, various newspapers. And so I was kind of going in there and discussing and asking some questions which he found a bit uncomfortable, I think, because we didn't speak for a few years. And then we came back again about a couple of years ago when the corona hit. And I started discussing how things were going, and it hadn't happened much with this marketplace thing, which didn't quite surprise me because Norway is a very small market. So then I said, okay, so you have this readability score. What's behind that number? Why does one article get 67%, not 97%? And they start to explain that behind that one readability score, there are about sort of between 100 and 150 small bot scores. So it takes all kinds of different aspects and characteristics of the article and values that, and he's aggregated up to one number. And I said, Well, if we can take some of those elements and feed back that to the journalist, it would be very interesting for journalists to be doing this, to use that tool as a part of the production process. So what we've kind of, with that pivot, we now changed it around to be an AI augmenting of the editorial process. So basically what we want to do is improve the productivity and the quality of what is being produced. And also we want to help the journalists and editors to understand why one article is doing well versus another one, because that's also a bit of a puzzle. And of course, by doing this, we think we can improve the consistency of the production that's being produced. We don't tell them, what to produce and how to write it. We just tell them that, what you're writing now, it appears to have this reader experience. And another important factor as well is that we give the management a tool to communicate better with the journalists or the editors as far as explain and discuss what aspects of the writing performance is good or bad or could be improved. So I just want to take you through the process. We're working with VG at the moment. So we received a pile of articles, 64,000 articles from the last 3 years worth, which we then analyzed, ingested into the system. And then we did sort of a more in-depth analysis to see what kind of things we found in those data. We asked them to give us their best 10, 15 articles of each category. So we had one is the body of all the articles to give us some characteristics, and then we said, okay, so which are the best ones, and what's the characteristics of the best ones of those articles? And then we ended up with setting up benchmarks. This is part of the user interface I'm going to see in Upfeed. And these blue lines are the benchmarks, and the dot is kind of indicating where the score is at the moment. So there are two different scores. One is what we call general readability, which looks at the flow, the structure, if you have enough subheadlines, if you have enough paragraphs. Basically, it's sort of easy to read and it helps you understand the text, difficult sentences and all kinds of various things. And then the other one is what we call style, or signature, as we call it, which tells you whether the article is in line with the brand's identity, the tone of voice of that particular part of the newspaper. So a VG sports article has one tone of voice, a VG entertainment article has slightly different tone of voice, but still there's the VG commonality between them. And also whether the article itself is meeting the reader's expectations. Because as I said, when you buy a packet of salt and vinegar crisps, you expect it to taste like that. And it's the same when you go onto Aftenposten or VG to read an article, you expect it to be presented in a certain way with a certain tone of voice. And that's kind of what we can help them with. So this is our first demo, which is running in WordPress. So this integrates into the tool. It's not a separate tool, which to us was very important, discussing how to best make this tool available to the journalists. So it's just another panel inside the CMS where you get indicators of, in this paragraph, there's something that you that you can have a look at, and we give you then actionable feedback about what can be improved in that paragraph. And that way, as you go through them and you make changes, then of course those lines or indicators will disappear. So what we found from the 64,000 articles, having ingested them, is that there was a quite distinct correlation between the Upfeed score and the viewing time and scroll depth, because with those data we received, with the articles, we received data on the viewing time and scroll depth and when we went through. And of course, as we dig deeper into the specific categories of the content, then the correlation becomes stronger and stronger. So this is just kind of showing you have the score, the upbeat readability score across here, and then you have the actual articles, scroll depth and reading time sort of scatter plot. And this is for war and conflict. So it kind of makes sense. Of course, regarding the style guide, I think there's a very important aspect as well is that what we're waiting for now is to be able to get more data from VG on the commercial performance, so to speak, of the article. So because they have data about who consumes what. We don't want to know who consumes the article. We can help the newspaper better if we receive content or information about what the different people characteristics that they are interested in is reading over time, so we can then see what are the reading characteristics that the certain person is enjoying or preferring by looking at the scroll depth and the viewing time in correlation with the certain sort of personas. So because they all have the different preferences, and we believe that we can help them, the journalists, if they want to write an article that's targeting a certain audience. With this information, we can then help them shape the reader experience so it appeals more to that particular audience. So one of the responses from Jeremy, the project manager, when we explained this, he said, well, that's excellent, because at the fitness club, or the Vektklubben, at Aftonbladet in Sweden, they have this issue that they're mainly women between 30 to 55 or something. And they would like to have more men. So, okay, maybe if you hire people or get people to understand what reader experience would appeal more to men and write more content in that style, you might be able to attract more men to read this content. So, so who's this for, and why should newspapers use it? Obviously, it's for the journalists to get sort of a kind of a dashboard of that can help them to understand what they're doing and how it's likely to be received. So, I had a question from the audience last week who said, well, what about the unions? How would they allow you to use this? And of course, the thing is that we're not telling the journalists, how to write, because that's their profession. All we're doing is we're providing with sort of like a dashboard in the car. You get the how much power you have left on the battery, an electric car, the speed you're driving at, the temperature, various aspects of the driving experience. You're having delayed or relayed through this dashboard, and we're kind of doing the same. We're kind of telling them, okay, so you might want to consider adding more paragraphs, adding more subheadlines. This sentence is quite heavy. Do you want to rewrite that one? So we kind of just give them more information about what they're doing than they had before. And also another aspect is that this was talking to Hector Arthur, who's working with us from London. He's the former editor of, I think he's worked for basically all the big nationals except for The Guardian. And he said another important aspect about this as well is the fact that an editor or a manager who doesn't like somebody can't fire them on a whim, because with this tool, you actually have a sort of performance track record. So you can kind of document that this journalist is actually performing well. So it can also be used from that context. So there are many different uses for this. And you can also, when we get more information about the preference of different users and segments, you can use as a strategic tool for the news organization to say, well, I want to create a new publication that's targeting retired people or young women or the youth. I mean, the sub-25 group, which is a very tricky one for the newspapers to get a hold of. Then you can use it to recruit journalists, because with the journalists using this, so you can analyze the content written by journalists, you can actually get the characteristics of the journalists, see what is their way of writing, what is their natural way of writing, and you can hire people according to what kind of reader experience you want to have for that particular paper. So I mean that there's a lot of different uses for this. And we're very excited to be working with Schibsted. So it's why not start with the most difficult ones? Because if it's good enough for VG, then it should be good enough for most other newspapers as well. It's quite fascinating, but because of VG, I think 50% of all adult Norwegian-speaking people on the planet read VG every day, which is quite amazing. So I have 3 minutes for questions now, or do we do the debate later, or later on? Okay. Then I can give next speaker.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for getting out of bed early to listen to us speak. My name is Miguel Silva. I'm the founder and CEO of Visualist. We are a startup that's also part of MCB Media. And what we do is we're working on automated compliance reviews for the film and the TV industry. And I'll go a bit into how that overfills potentially into journalism and things like that. But the problem that we are solving is a problem that is largely transparent to the user, but it's very real for those that buy and sell or buy and publish content from one part of the world and need to distribute it to another part of the world. Number one, the world's appetite for video is only growing. And talking about the interesting statistics, this is one that I found fairly recently, that throughout the pandemic days, quite naturally, I guess, people started watching more and more online content. Video content in particular. And now we are up to 6.5 hours of daily consumption for every adult in the planet, which is an enormous amount of video that is getting consumed. Not all that video is moderated, and that's where we come in. But more importantly, though, yeah, that's a long average. A bit too many animations. More importantly, though, every country around the world has regulators, and regulation is becoming also increasingly more intricate. It used to be so that regulation was very, very clear for broadcast distribution, very unclear or non-existent for online distribution. So it used to be so that Netflix, for example, was really not regulated in the same footings as, for example, the BBC out in the UK. But all of that is changing. Even the own platforms, YouTube and TikTok themselves, are starting to regulate their own usage. Why? Because they don't want to be associated with the most extreme type of content. They don't want to be associated with anything that alienates the younger audiences or sensitive audiences, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all, I see that I'm flipping around too much. It's all changing very, very quickly. And so because of that, then you have the need, even though video consumption is increasing, you have a much of a bigger need as well for regulating and moderating that content around the world. And that is a task that it's actually quite complicated. You have to look at many different aspects of the content. There is such a thing as legal compliance reviews, where you're looking at things like the music rights that are being used in the video. Are they actually covered? Are they not covered? Something that happens particularly when you have unscripted content or user-generated content is you're very quickly infringing on somebody's rights without really knowing. A topic that is becoming more and more of concern and more addressable, I guess, both for scripted, professional, and unscripted content, is Gdpr, and not able to, watching out that you're not publishing people's personal information. And I'll talk a bit about the work that we've done in that respect in a minute. You also have such thing as technical compliance, and that's more straightforward. Does the video files that we received, are they actually in the right format? Do they have the right subtitles? Are they missing frames? Or do they have commercials inserted that we need to remove, et cetera, et cetera? That part has been really quite well addressed already by existing solutions in the market. But the part that really interests us, the part where we come in, is editorial compliance reviews, because that is something that still, again, people spend a lot of time doing. And that's basically eyeballing the entire content, the entire video, the entire movie, the series, the documentary, whatever it might be, and just making sure that visually there's nothing in there that might be against a particular regulation, whether there's unintended nudity or unintended or intended swearing or violence that needs to be addressed. If you have in a newscast, if you have a war scene and there's you're showing a lot of bodies or a lot of violent things, then you have to consider that basically, and you have to figure out what needs to be blurred out or what needs to be cut, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we've been working on, given that this is it takes around the world, it differs. Some broadcasters use a lot of time on this, some broadcasters use less time on this, depending on the regulatory picture in their country. But on average, then, people do spend a lot of time, and there's usually small armies of people that deal with this in one way, shape, or form. Whether it's people that are dedicated to compliance reviews, or whether that responsibility is passed on to the editorial teams to actually do their own compliance as they're doing the editorial process, or whether it's pushed down to the production houses. It's something that does happen, basically, in many different levels. So what we do is we created a tool that's based on AI to be able to crawl video using computer vision, figuring out the things that might be problematic according to your regulatory picture, and that's something that you as a user, you set yourself. You go in and you create the policy, and you're saying, for this policy, I want to look for things that may be child unfriendly, or I want to look specifically for things that might have to do with for example, in India, we're working a lot with one of the broadcasters there, and they have a very specific regulation, which is whenever somebody is smoking on screen, whether in any type of content, they actually need to put up a graphic that says "smoking kills." It's kind of like one of those regulations, similar to the way you have to have disclosure on Marlboro packets and things like that, saying that smoking causes cancer. No. So to be able to find this, detect all this content, all these circumstances easily enough, we made this tool built entirely on the cloud, where you can upload your video, or you can take in a live stream. We automatically then detect everything that you've decided from a policy perspective might be problematic, and then we turn it over to human moderators then to go through everything that we found and say, this is okay, this is not okay, this is compliant, this is not compliant. This is a false positive, because it does happen with AI, of course. We find things that aren't necessarily what the system says that it does. And then we also automate, we have a collaboration framework on top of that, so that if you are not the sole responsible for making a decision, if you need to collaborate also with the editorial team, for example, or you need to bring in the legal team, or you need to talk to the original owner of the content, it might be so that you don't have the rights to change any of the content that you're reviewing, but you need to pick up and talk to the original owner of the content. Usually happens when it comes from a studio in the US, for example. You have a good way of doing that online. You can actually then tag people on a specific part of the movie, and then they will get a notification that they can come in, they can add to their comments online, then you can both agree on whether this is compliant, not compliant, et cetera, et cetera. And then we automate the entire reporting part of it as well, because that's something that the compliance officers, they really hate doing, or everybody hates doing any type of reporting. Now, one thing is like spending a lot of time reviewing content, and then after that spent a ton of hours documenting everything that you found and making that report available for regulators or the powers that be whenever they need that. We automate the compliance reporting element of the solution. But I'm not here really to pitch the tool. If anybody wants to take a look at the tool, I'm happy to give you a demo afterwards. Or if you just go into visualist.one and create your free account, you're able then to upload videos and process it if you just want to take a look to see how AI behaves for the circumstance. I'm here to talk most about what is it that we would have been working on that may be of use potentially for journalism, and what has been our experience with AI in general. And so one of the case studies that we've been working on a lot during this past year is a case study that was done together with PBS America, which is PBS, as some of you might know, is the public broadcaster in the US. However, they distribute a lot of their content to other parts of the world, and they do have an arm in the UK called PBS America, which is basically the channel that distributes PBS content in the European Union. And so together with Stadium, we were part of that program, which we highly recommend. It's a great program for if any of you are startups and you're thinking about joining Stadium, by all means do. They're really great people. But financed by Stadium, basically, we got together with PBS. We asked them, what are your needs? What is it something that you think AI might be able to solve for you? And they told us one of the problems that we have, or the complexities of the work that we do in compliance reviews, is the fact that it's very easy to miss things that are in the background. If there's like a bad word written on graffiti on a wall, it's very easy to miss, because you're very much focused on everything that's happening in the foreground, and the characters and the people you're interviewing, and et cetera, et cetera. And you can easily miss, for example, somebody's car with a license plate that passed in the background. Technically, you've already published information about that person that may be tracked to them, et cetera. And there's other cases of GDPR that kind of like go into this. So what we did is we trained an AI model to specifically go through video and pick out anything that might be, or detect anything that might be both bad language, hate speech, or personal information that is specifically in the background, both in graphical things like a T-shirt, text, or like in this case right here in the wall, or in the subtitles for something that is being transcribed that people are saying, et cetera, et cetera. And that is something that you think, some of the cases are really quite straightforward. Some of the cases are, you pick up things that you shouldn't be picking up. In other cases, you do have things that are okay to have because within the context of what you're showing, it's okay. For example, this is an actual town in Austria that is called. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in Austrian or in German. No? But so in these cases, it's okay. We still pick it up, and that's why you still need a human moderator to go through this and say, in the context of what you're doing, this is actually not a bad language. It's actually the name of a town. But also people wonder, how applicable is this really to markets in the Nordics, for example, that are strictly speaking, unregulated? And this is where we think that also that is changing a lot, that it's going to be more and more important here in the Nordics. Because there actually have been cases. This is a recent case, and I'm not here to pick on TV2, by the way, if there's anyone from TV2 in the audience. But this is actually a case that happened not too long ago. There's a program called SOFA. I don't watch that program myself, but I did see the news article afterwards, where two people were getting interviewed as part of the show. And the dog, as many dogs do, my own dog back home as well, they have a collar with the phone number of the owner in the collar. And this is a sort of thing that's very easy to miss. You can shoot it, you put it out on demand, people start watching it. And then before you know it, these gentlemen started getting phone calls from people, from perfect strangers. Technically, that's already a GDPR breach. 5 minutes later, it was fixed. They took down the video, they blurred out the phone number, and nothing. It was mostly a humorous anecdote, I guess. It became more of a humorous anecdote afterwards. But what would have happened if the phone calls that they would have gotten would have been hate speech related, or would have been like hate crime related? That's where it starts to get a little bit more problematic, missing these type of small things that are happening. And that's where AI can really help, because AI can be trained to be very, very specific, to pick up something that is very easy for the human eye to miss, and let you know basically that this actually exists and it needs to be addressed. What AI is actually not that good at is putting things into more of a complex context, to put it that way. One of the cool things that we've been trying to do, basically, since we started, is doing automatic age classification. We think, wouldn't it be very cool if right now, if you have a movie or you have a series or something, if you can just pipe it into a box and it comes out with the right age classification for all the different countries in which you operate, or that would save basically people a lot of time, because age classification is today also done manually. Somebody sits down, watches an entire movie, and says, okay, according to the regulations of this market, this is a +18 movie, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with that is that the regulation framework for age classification can be a little bit wishy-washy. So here you have a very good example, and this I'm taking straight from Editorial here in Norway, their framework. If you're going to classify a movie or an asset as 18+, it needs to have violent content and/or expression that contains a lot of gross, cynical, and/or detailed violent acts. The example that I'm using here is Pulp Fiction. Anybody that has seen Pulp Fiction, which I imagine it's everybody in the room and even everybody that's watching on the stream, would probably agree that this is a very violent movie. There's a lot of blood, there's a lot of gore, there's a lot of violent behavior in it. Everybody would agree that this is violence. And AI does as well. AI would be able to pick it up and say, this is violent behavior. However, if you have a movie where if you're going to classify it as an age 6 rating, you can have violent portrayals. They are permitted, so long as they are clearly humorous and over the top. Slapstick violence, as they call it. And an example for that they actually do give in Medicinets guidelines is Home Alone, where you actually have some pretty violent things happening on screen. You're getting somebody's head is getting burned, somebody's getting also hit in the face with a bucket of paint and stuff like that, and then people are getting hurt. But it's all humorous. Everybody that sees that on a theater, everybody understands that this is meant to be humorous. It's very much over the top. It's not meant to be taken literally that this child is hurting these adults in this way. AI doesn't know that. AI doesn't recognize that. AI will not distinguish between violence that is meant to be violent and violent that is meant to be humorous, because AI does not have the human experience of what is humorous and what is slapstick. So that is one of the limitations. Today we can use AI to pick up very, very detailed things. We can use AI to pick up smoking, to pick up drinking, to even gambling behavior, nudity, violence, etc., etc. But you still need humans to be able to put that into context and decide whether it's compliant or not compliant, to put it that way. So that's what we have been working on. As I mentioned, quite happy to to stay behind and show you the tool. We didn't want to turn this into a pitch session for the tool. We would very much love, like that case that I'm talking about, automatic age classification, is something that we're still working on. We would very much love to both network and then eventually collaborate with universities that might want to research contextual AI, because there's a lot of work, very interesting work that is getting done in that space. And we also would love to talk to journalistic schools, because there is such a thing as journalism compliance, or like editorial compliance in newscasts that happens. And we would love to see what are the cases then for our technology that are being used there. So thank you very much. Quite happy to take your questions when the time comes. I guess we're going to have the Q&A.
Thank you very much, everybody. I will start with Jenny. The survey you have done is a bit similar. The results are a bit similar that we have done in all industries within the west coast of Norway. And what we see is that the manager, the top management, knows the least about how they can create value from the data they have. And this is a problem you guys trying to sell, and the buyers are the managers often. So how can we change that?
Well, yeah, that's the big question. Well, I think that just have to take baby steps in terms of educational efforts and knowledge sharing events like this, and also trying to create more of a conversation between different management levels in the organization, because from my experience, mid-range managers are much more into this and know so much more, perhaps because they have like a direct relationships to operational things, and that sort of triggers ideas of how to use AI. So to make sure that kind of discussion is also alive within the organization. But from my perspective, and maybe people trying to shape progress in this, it's very much about information. Yeah.
How do the customers you're talking to, how do they react? How is the implementing phase from attention to knowledge to response? Okay, I'm going to use your tool.
Yeah, that's well, to address a little bit first the bias, because it is related. One of the biggest hesitations you have to people adopting AI is precisely bias, and how accurate this is according to my needs and the things that we're trying to detect. And one of the examples that I always use is nudity. For example, if you're an editor in, let's say, Norway or Sweden or Denmark, and you see a movie with a scene that has a certain amount of nudity, you're probably not going to react to it, because the regulation here is so that it's okay. Mm-hmm. And the sensitivity, shall we say, in the audience is that this is okay. So you'll mark it as compliant. But if you're an editor in again, not to pick on any specific country, but let's say Malaysia or Singapore or any of the countries that have very, very strict regulations against nudity, you're going to think that this is not okay. And even forget about nudity. If you have somebody with bare shoulders, for example, or a very light shirt, that might already be considered not okay. So you have to do something with the content. You either have to mark it this close to the audience or blur it out or whatever the case may be. So one of the difficulties we were having is if you have a model that recognizes somebody with a light dress, how do we put it into context with the people that are actually using the tool? And then what we came up is we should have technology in the middle, machine learning technology in the middle, to actually pick up on your sensitivities depending on the usage of the tool. If you're marking this compliant, then we've learned that you're tolerant to this level of nudity. Where somebody's marking this non-compliant, we've learned the opposite as well. So bias is important. We came up with a way to use that bias to personalize results for our users. And in that way, we've actually also then seen less hesitation, shall we say, to adopting our tool.
And within Upfeed, how is the editorial staff taking your solution? The editors and the rest of the editorial staff?
It's sort of a bit hesitant to begin with, because I think it's from a very different angle. I mean, they've been using the newspaper's been using AI for quite a while, at least especially in the Nordics, where we are sort of further ahead than most when it comes to automation and so on. What they're used to is to see AI being used to analyze and find patterns of behavior. So they're quite familiar with that aspect of using AI. And of course, when we come to them and say that, well, actually, we're not looking at what type of content a reader is preferring to read and trying to predict what is his next preferred piece of content you're going to serve him, or list as related articles or interesting stories, we actually go into the actual story itself and then the quality, which is a very different concept, because then you're kind of, as I mentioned before, some people might think that we're stepping on the journalist's toes because we are encroaching on their sort of authority as the best producer of content on the planet. But it's varied. Last week the chief data controller for editorial side of Media House, the Belgian group, I mean, he texted me before I got off stage because he wanted to have a word and discuss how we can do research together. Because he recognized that this is a very unique tool, and one thing that really specifically mentioned was sort of constructive journalism, which I know we're going to be talking about in a different session later today, where he said that today people are being told not to watch news by the doctor because it's become too toxic. And then you saw that we can do, when you do sentiment analysis, we can analyze what is the topic of an article and extract the essence of an article. He wants to then work with us to see how we can help them with this and many other concepts.
But we are still in the research phase here, on all levels, more or less, as I also understand your presentation. Is there any questions from you to the speakers, from the audience here?
Hi. My question is, are there any kinds of data that you really wanted to have, but has been too difficult to collect?
I can start. Well, the thing is, the Gdpr is quite a tricky one. It took us half a year of discussions with Schibsted's legal team just to get the editorial articles. The scroll depth and that kind of was easy, but one of the problems I highlight was that people are being named in the articles, and we're receiving content which might not have been published yet. So it was a whole discussion back and forth, and I think one of the major issues at the moment is that GDPR is so new that there hasn't been any cases to court that kind of outlines and give people a sort of a good sense of how it's going to be practiced. So there's a set of rules, but how are the courts going to judge a case based on the rules? So there's no court practice yet, and I think that's one of the big hurdles at the moment, because as I was talking to somebody, there's some news organizations like Schibsted is the biggest one in Norway, and they said, well, of course, if there's going to be a case, they're going to, and we stepping out of line, they're going to come after us because we're the biggest and most visual. Whereas other newspaper groups in other countries might be more easygoing because there's no practice. So it's tricky. So especially this trying to get hold of the data from the commercial side when it comes to what type of audience is consuming what articles and how are they consuming those articles. That's still, the jury's still out there, which is the really, really useful stuff as far as being able to target your content. And of course, the other thing is such a cultural divide as well, because the first articles, that's from the editorial side, how the who's consuming what is from the commercial side. In Media House, there's one manager who owns both of them, so it's easier there, but it's also organizational as well as legal.
Do you, Miguel, have any difficulties getting contact and data?
Yeah, I think in general, getting more nuanced data, more varied data to be able to train AI properly is it's always an issue. No, with volumes you get better results, but when you're starting out training something, I'll give you an example. Right now, so we trained the model to recognize hate speech, and that we were able to do quite successfully because we had access to a lot of great data, and that is because we actually plugged into a Twitter's API, and Twitter is ground zero for hate speech in English, no? So we were able to get a lot of data out of that. We were able to successfully train an AI to recognize hate speech in English. Now, if you try to do that with any other language, how do you get enough data to be able then to teach an AI that this is actually hate speech? And if you have, and hate speech can also vary a lot linguistically, no? In some, if you're saying like, I don't know, all cops are dogs, that might be okay, but if I'm saying you're a dog, then it becomes hate speech, to put it that way. So it's very, very nuanced, and just getting enough data to be able to recognize that, it's tricky. And going through GDPR as well, it's a little bit, it's the own GDPR legislations that stop you from making technology to not breach GDPR, is what we found. Like one of the ideas that we pitched to some of the partners is, wouldn't you like to have, because this happens today very, very often. If you have, particularly with unscripted content, if you have a newsroom, or if you have a big audience of people and you're filming them, eventually you might film somebody who is recognizable, and that technically becomes also a GDPR breach. No, so we were pitching the idea is, why don't you use then AI to be able to do facial recognition and automatically do a reverse lookup to see if you can recognize somebody, and if you can recognize somebody, then you know that that's the face you need to blur, or these are things that you need to take care of, no? But they say even building that tool would already put us into hot water, and you into hot water, by the way, in Europe anyway. So you have a lot, you have some data you could use, you can't use it.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Christopher Brennan, co-founder of Overtone, which is here for the Stadium program. I have a question for all three of you, just because getting innovation into newsrooms requires integrating with those newsrooms. And I was wondering, where do you think that integration should happen to make it easiest? Is it a new tool from the publisher like Schibsted is doing? Is it a vendor's tool? Is it kind of putting data or AI insights into a tool they already have? Where is that going to work for driving this forward?
For starters, I think that it's important to decentralize innovation in organizations, because many organizations has a tradition to create innovation hubs. And the bigger the media houses, the more isolated is the innovation hubs. And I think I can see a development where organizations try to move out these innovators closer to the newsrooms. And that, I think, is a very good development, because to create engagement from journalists, for instance, they need to see, how can this help me in my everyday work? And so then there has to be a dialogue between innovation and news production, very, every day. So that's, yeah.
Well, it's in the case of Upfeed, we're delivering a software as a service, and of course, then it's really important to have the lowest possible threshold for people to start using it. So our strategy is to integrate it into the CMSs. So we're in contact with various CMS vendors to get them to sort of, well, of course, as always, they are busy. So then it's sort of a kind of a matching game. I've spoken to a lot of these CMS vendors, and then I go around to their customers and see if we can trigger somebody to make it a priority for that particular CMS vendor to do the integration. So the ideal thing is that we have it in all the top CMSs that's being used by editorial people, and that it's sort of grayed out and sort of, okay, try this for X number of days, and they'll have the generic version. And if that's we can then start selling and approaching them. So yeah, minimum threshold to get people to use it, because I think it's also, then you increase the awareness of the possibilities that technology gives you.
Yeah. No, and I fully agree with everything you say. And I think fragmentation in media is a legendary topic, isn't it? Like everyone, they're going from the way you produce television 50 years ago is largely still the way you do it today, and then they're trying to get more up to date with how do you actually deal with video archives. Now, some of it has moved to the cloud, but you still find that a lot of material is still not digitized, might be sitting in an archive in some cellar somewhere, and some material is digital, but it's only accessible on a premise. So how do you deal with all that is going to be one of the challenges of your tool, because it does happen to us quite often that we go out, we talk to the compliance teams, create a lot of interest, a lot of excitement for the tool, and then they move you on to talk to the technical team, and you find out that, okay, there's a certain degree of implementation difficulty here that we just hadn't foreseen. And so what we ended up doing is spending a lot of time on exactly that, because it takes away, if the value of your product is that you're saving them time, but you're adding a lot of time in preparing the content to save them time, then the net effect is zero. And so we ended up having to think about, well, beyond the use of our tool, how can we also save time in the onboarding of the content and processing of content, et cetera, et cetera. And we ended up just connecting against cross platforms in AWS, for example, because we're also software as a service. So you can have cross accounts, and you can very easily then ingest accounts. We built a lot of automation in our tool. So say like every week or every day or every month, whatever, go into this watch folder, automatically fetch all the new videos. So we recognize whether it's new or whether it's old, automatically run a policy, and then have it ready to go for the teams by Monday morning, for example. So you built a lot of automation in the background to make sure that the integration points are as frictionless as possible. But it's never 100% frictionless. Okay.
Other questions?
To Jenny, in your study regarding this journalism, is there any difference between the publishers and the broadcasters in the use and the need of urgency within using AI?
Between newspapers and broadcasters?
Yeah, publishers and newspapers and broadcasters, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Because, most newspapers in Sweden, for instance, is local dailies, and they have completely different conditions. They work on another market than the broadcasters do. So yeah, it's a big difference. So we have like big broadcasting national companies with great resources and connections, and we have newspaper media houses, which is, they differ in how far they have come. Some may be just in the process of digitalizing their whole production now, which is kind of late when you think about it. But it's actually, we have that kind of spread in progress. So it's, and that is very much tied to local markets and, keeping the print as the core of, because that's actually driving the revenues still for many. So I think that we need to have that in mind. It's a very good point that it's very diverse when it comes to different kinds of media. Yeah.
Other questions? Here's one.
Yeah, this is a question for Jenny on our study. In your work, did you come across many organizations that had an overall strategy for AI, or was it primarily sort of case by case or use by use for tools within the organization?
Yes, it's the later. Yeah. No, there are some organizations like Schibsted is one good example that actually works very, top-down sort of to create an overall strategy for AI. And Swedish Radio is another example of that. But mostly there's been like an ad hoc development where you have a need and you elaborate on that and you take it. It's trial and error. And that is not only AI development. I think that's overall, that maybe when we talk about strategies in media, it's many times after construction as well.
Yeah, I was wondering, when you have tools that use, well, typically marketing tools that show you how much an article sells or how long people read it, it can often be because the news is sensational or because it's, yeah, like the weight example that, you know, like stories about weight loss, they sell very well and people want to read it. But how do you have any mechanisms in place to ensure that people, like that a news organization does not only provide journalism people want, but also the journalism that people need and that we have a responsibility to provide?
I wish we could sort of to some way, degree, sort of influence them to provide a broad range. But I mean, this is all the policy up to the individual newspaper and the individual editor of what kind of news they're going to provide. But everybody I talk to are very conscious about not just doing clickbait, which is kind of the traffic focus. I think that's, and especially now with a lot of the newspapers, I think particularly Nordics have a big focus on subscription, and they're doing well on subscription, and then it becomes more focus on providing quality news stories and quality content, because they see that builds loyalty. And of course, the biggest problem for subscription economy is churn. And you don't want to sell the same subscription to the same subscriber every year or every 6 months. So you want to make sure that you provide as good a content as possible. And that's not the clickbait, because clickbait, you have a very sort of striking headline. And then when you go in to read the article, suddenly the whole thing deflates because the content itself is not matching to the sort of the characteristics of the headline, and I think that's so. I think it's going in the right way, so to speak, away from the massive clickbait. And I think also they recognize that quality news, not just for the subscribers, but for people in newspapers who are not using subscription, you still need people to be and consume and build to create a loyalty to them, because the longer they stay on, the more you can present them ads, which then gives you the revenue or other monetization factors. So yeah, I think it's quality journalism is coming back in fashion, I think.
Then I think that we should stop this Q&A, because there is other sessions that people also want to see. And if there are anybody who wants to talk to those, they are available a few minutes more. And if you want to have a discussion, just stay and ask and participate. Thank you.